Welcome to the Startup Competitors Podcast, where we talk with early-stage entrepreneurs to understand what information they use to inform product roadmap, strategy, and market differentiation.
Welcome to the podcast. Today, we're sitting down with Luke Jacobs, who's the CEO and one of the co-founders of Encamp. Luke, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike. It's good to be here.
Awesome, man. Tell us about Encamp. Give us the pitch.
Yeah, so at Encamp, we're a software company, and our mission is to make environmental compliance fast, simple, and accurate. The way that we do this is by providing an online platform that allows companies to manage their environmental data, and they're led through a series of questions for any given report that really simplifies regulations into plain English. They're asked questions that just deal with the regulations that are actually, on their top of mind for compliance purposes. And then once they've put in all of the data, we have software that automates actually compiling and submitting the reports to the necessary regulatory bodies. So it's sort of like a TurboTax for environmental compliance is what we like to, kind of tell people if I had one sentence to say what we're doing.
Nice. And you spent time in this industry doing this manually, right? Before launching the product?
Yeah, correct. So before starting Encamp, I was working at a large international engineering firm. I was an environmental scientist and consultant. So this was kind of my aha moment where I realized, this entire industry, which is $300 billion in the US, it's a huge industry, the environmental services space, was relying on inefficiencies, and the consultants and their customers didn't have aligned values in basically what they were trying to get done. The consultants wanted to maximize the time they could bill. The customers wanted their businesses to be in compliance as quickly and cheaply and accurately as possible. And at the time, one of my other co-founders and my brother, Sam, was working at Zenefits, which had done a very similar thing in the HR space, and they had a lot of success. They, colored outside the lines a little too much, but which we're making sure not to do. But during the time when he was there, we started discussing a lot about why Zenefits was able to grow so quickly and really the value proposition they were using, which was taking something that was done in a back office, your HR, you might have someone who you're just paying as a consultant to manage that. And they thought, why can we have an app on our phone that can do everything that we would want, but I'm still stuck doing my HR with this back office? We saw a lot of analogous similarities between that and the environmental compliance space and decided that it was worth, a shot to actually build something. So our other co-founder, Dan, was working as a software developer in anesthesiology at Epic Systems. And I kind of brought him in as well, was beginning to discuss how he dealt with building highly regulated code. They had a lot of HIPAA compliance, a lot of just technical details, but then also kind of the business and compliance details of making sure that your medical systems are right. Yeah. And there's a lot of oversight on that. And we all just thought, this is a idea that's worth taking a swing at it. And we were all excited about the idea of entrepreneurship. So just about a year ago, we decided to just go all in and see what we could do. And that leads us to here.
Dude, that's awesome. Yeah. Paint a picture real quick for who an ideal customer is for you. Is this like a Fortune 100 company? Is this a manufacturing firm? Like just, you can give names of real companies, or you can just paint a picture of a persona of a company. But I'd love to know, who are you selling to ideally?
Yeah. So this has actually been one of the things that's been top of mind for us, because we actually have so many different verticals that we can sell into that it's been really important for us to get organized and make sure that we're trying to nail our niche down, especially as we're growing. So this could be used by someone as small as a one-off golf course or an ice rink, or a mom and pop shop that has compressed gases for maybe like their drink dispensing. Anyone who has sort of these just chemicals that could prove hazardous to the environment, they're required to submit these different reports. This goes all the way up to UPS, FedEx, Amazon, Walmart, Ford, Shell. I mean, it's Fortune 10 really is also doing this. And those were the companies that I was working with before, which there are pros and cons of kind of trying to well, attacking the enterprise space right away is highly lucrative if it works, but it's a lot longer sales cycle, a lot more due diligence, just requires a lot more relationship building. And so actually right now, a lot of our early adopters and where we've been working hard to gain a lot of traction is actually in the agriculture industry. And this has been a great fit because in the ag space, there is an increasing awareness of the need for efficiencies, especially because farmers are incredibly conscious of their bottom lines, and any sort of price fluctuation in commodity markets is really going to affect them. So they're trying to find ways to cut costs. And basically every farm has enough fertilizer, enough ammonium anhydrous that you're going to need to be reporting these. So we have, right now we have 130 customers, and 100 of those are agriculture, which has been really great for us to sort of start, landing and expanding, nail the niche that we're, getting a lot of great feedback in. There's kind of a clear connection also with the Midwest, which we found is great. A lot of our customers are in Illinois, Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana. So being able to drive to them has been really great. But as far as future visions, we definitely are looking to move up market, not leaving behind the SMB or the ag space, but we have some enterprise pilots that are running right now, which are significantly more valuable per report.
Right.
And these businesses that we're selling to have a lot more need to have systems that allow them to organize across, say, 30 states. If you're Amazon, you aren't filing one report, you're filing 6,000 reports, and you need to be able to track what's going on with all of those. And thus far, that process is done pretty much exclusively in Excel with consultants. And I have nothing against Excel. I love, putting together my spreadsheets, but it is not very good at giving you that bird's eye view of what is happening across your organization, especially as a manager. So that's been it's been an interesting problem for us to work through in terms of our sales and marketing, because we have a clear SMB play and a clear enterprise play, and they essentially use the same product, but the ways that they gain value from the product are quite different. If the SMBs are more interested in just something that truly is a TurboTax feel, you just can use it, and in an hour you're done with your reporting and you click the button and it's submitted. If you're an enterprise, you have a lot more needs to assign reports to hundreds of facilities, track the progress as data is collected, maybe reach out to people if they're falling behind on collecting their data, and essentially just getting the ability to take control of your process and not rely on consultants who are charging you thousands and thousands of dollars per report without providing any of the services like tracking, like automated submissions.
So 130-ish customers to date. 3 co-founders. Any other team members? Just the 3 of you guys?
So it's just the 3 of us right now. And we have actually, exciting news, we have made an offer for our first outside engineer who's accepted. So he's starting on the 10th. We're really excited. That's awesome. Then thank you. And then we're interviewing a couple different sales and marketing folks who we're looking to supplement the team. I would say in the next 3 months, we're probably going to add 1 to 2 more people. We just received our seed funding. So we've finished up raising a round of about $800,000. And now we are sort of in stable growth mode. We're excited to get to the point where we could look at a hypergrowth situation, but we are very interested in walking before we're running or flying and just making sure that really the stability of the company, the repeatability of the sales process is there before we invest too heavily in hiring 10 SDRs and just throwing them into the market.
Yeah. Awesome. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. When you think about competitors in this space, so obviously there's the consulting firms. Is there anybody else digitally doing what you're doing? Is there any other direct competitor?
So right now, no. And this is not going to last, I would say. But as of this moment, we are the only company that is doing this type of product in the space. And when I say this type of product, what that really means is we're combining the best parts of environmental data management systems, which we do have some tangential competitors who are essentially like a nice big database online where you can put all of your environmental data in. But then companies who use them still are often paying consultants to take the data out of those systems and actually figure out the reporting requirements, what's due to who, at what dates, with what data. And so then you're actually sort of getting hit by both sides, because you might be paying for a subscription software program, and then you're also paying your consultant hourly to use that software.
Right.
We decided that, we're living in 2018, it's almost 2019, and there's really no reason to have a system that can't do both. So we are starting with a very select number of reports and then automating the entire service. This is something where we can't compete with, say, like my old employer. We had, 10,000 people worldwide. There are environmental engineers and chemists. You could use them to, if you're drilling a mine shaft, you could use a firm like that. Or if you're building a bridge, you could use a firm like that. And we're not going to be able to compete with that full service offering. And it's not our intention. But as far as doing the compliance reporting, this is essentially, take information from cell A1 and put it in form square A1.
Right.
We just think there's no reason that someone should be charging $160 an hour to copy and paste those back and forth. Plus, there's really a lot of room for human error when you're doing that, especially if you're doing it hundreds of times. And the cost of non-compliance is extremely high. So to kind of paint the picture for you, the first report that we're automating out for the majority of our customers is hazardous material inventory reports. These are essentially like taxes. If you have hazardous materials, every year you need to keep track of what you had on site for how long, how you were storing it, what temperature, pressure, container systems they're in, just everything that you would need to know to make sure that it's stored correctly. And then you need to file with your state and local and fire department regulatory bodies to essentially tell them each year, here's where everything is, here's how we stored it. We're making sure that it's not leaking into the groundwater, it's not going to explode. And if you make one mistake, it's a $55,000 violation per error per day. So if you have 10 facilities, you make one mistake on each of those facilities and you catch it one day late, you're looking at a $550,000 fine right away. And that's for one day. So this is something where we've had really like a lot of success, essentially selling not only the increased efficiency, but the increased accuracy and essentially risk mitigation. Because if you pay us $1,000 to file a report and we can say it will be done correctly, and if you do it incorrectly, even for one day, it's a $55,000 fine plus a terrible press release, and you're the company that had an environmental violation. Exactly. Yeah, no one wants to do that. That's been, I'd like to say no brainer, but there's always an educational component because we're trying to essentially show people how much easier this can be with software, which I would say this is a very good time to be moving into this space. And I think it's one of the reasons why we are the first to market, but I don't think we will remain the first to market, because it is just becoming increasingly trendy and just useful, essentially, to have consumer feeling technology in the enterprise. So making something that a non-expert can just use like you're using a smartphone app.
Yeah.
If you can order stuff on Amazon, you should be able to order your reports. Essentially, you can just click through, say what you need. We lead you through what you actually need to enter, make it really easy to import from other systems, which that's been another kind of competitive positioning that we've done. We don't want to make people replace their current system. So if you're using another data management system or Excel, that's fine with us. You just can essentially transfer the data pretty easily into our system. And then from there, you're pretty much in business. And it takes 5 minutes to get started instead of, a 2-month implementation process where you have to, have your own consulting team audit everything.
So I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, there's no defensible IP here in the sense of like a patent new process for how to get this information reported, or have you guys done that?
Yeah, so we don't have any patents. We've been working with some lawyers who are like IP specialists to essentially explore what we could potentially do.
Yeah.
But software patents, they're tricky.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll actually We might or might not be able to do it. I'd say that the way we see our competitive advantage is essentially scale and getting market share quickly. And we have two of our technical advisors. We've worked pretty hard to assemble a technical advising team. One of them is a senior engineer at Netflix, and another is a VP of sales at Salesforce. And working with them, we've been crafting our strategy of how do we actually create a moat if we're not going to rely on, a patent that's going to be just a brick wall to any competitors. Because it's unlikely that we would, frankly, get enough benefit from that to even make it worth spending, all the time, effort, money on trying to get patents filed.
So when you play out into the future a little bit, give me an idea of how that moat changes over time. So and I'll lead the witness here a little bit, right? So so my immediate thought is are there, once you've got an established market, customer base and in particular, even verticals within there, right? So agriculture and others where you build up a big enough pool of business where you guys can then start to go in there and do things like, well, what if we created sensors that could automatically stream this data up into our system? Or maybe those sensors exist already and you just can find a way to tie into them and stuff like that. Can you, if you're willing to, can you talk a little bit about that future and how you guys start to build more of a moat around the verticals that you start to capture?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, it really all starts with the software. And the way that we have architected our whole system is that it's a hub and spoke model. So the hub is your centralized database as a customer where all of your information is stored. And then each of the spokes is a different report that as we add more and more reports, it's really easy to essentially, a la carte say, I also need that report. Let's add that to my Encamp account. You get the extra charge. And the more reports that we add, the higher utility our customers get because they don't have to re-enter data. They don't have to switch systems because I'd say 70 to 80% of the information on any given report is actually repeated across many, many reports. Like, what's your business address? Who are your emergency contacts? What are your emergency plans? What are the storage containers you just use across your entire, company? You probably are ordering from one or two suppliers for all of your totes or whatever. So there's the software aspect, which we have plans to essentially expand into the 7 most commonly filed environmental reports, which is a $5 billion market in the US.
That $5 million, $5 billion, sorry, that yeah. 5 million, you shouldn't build that software. Yeah. $5 billion market, that is based on consulting fees spent to do that?
No.
Where does that number come from?
Yeah, great question. So that is based on essentially what we have heard back from the market when we've asked people essentially how they would value software that does this. And that's actually undercutting the consultants by about 50%. So right now we're charging in the range of about $1,000 per report. This is pretty cheap compared to consultants. It's often about $2,000 per report. It would depend on the report. I say $2,000 per report, but there's some nuance in a Clean Air Act report compared to a Clean Water Act report. There's varying degrees of work, but I'd say, kind of your average would be $2K from a consultant. We're charging about an average of $1K. Our $5 billion estimation is really just a bottoms-up analysis where there are 5 million of these filed a year, and we just know what we can charge for them. And, we'll see. It's a startup, so it's early days, but that's sort of our, I'd say back of the napkin, but it's a little more than a back of the napkin, but it's, it's our best projections that this market is conservatively 5 billion for just the automation of the 7 most common environmental reports. And then we actually have, I'll just tell you, we're working on it right now and we're going to be releasing it in 2019. One of our kind of core tools and pieces of the platform that we're getting ready to release is a compliance calendar. And what we've done is essentially map out all of the federal databases that contain environmental reporting information from companies that have reported, so we can see what everyone has reported in the past. And from our app, you can search for your organization and your facility. We pull the information and say, is this your facility? You can select it. And then we can see, based on everything that you've reported in the past, we have the business logic database of in this state, you have these reports on these timelines. Here's the links to the forms. All of that information gets aggregated, so you get a custom compliance calendar for your organization. And this is something that we're going to be selling really like as soon as we can launch it. Right. If we could have launched it 6 months ago, that would have been even better. This has been something people have been asking. It is
the framework that allows you to do the upsell, right? So if you're doing 2 reports with us today and you really should be doing 4, we're going to show you the ones that you're not doing with us.
Exactly. And then you can see, here's what's due, here's the way to do it. And then when we release a new module, we say, hey, we just released this new module. You're already on it. Yeah. So it's the land and expand strategy. But to answer your original question about hardware,
sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's we can just chat about all sorts of things. It's an interesting topic, but we have a tentative future goal. We'll see kind of the details are going to play out, I'm sure, differently than I'm thinking about it right now in a year or 2 years. But RFID tags are incredibly cheap, and the goal would be to essentially create, when you get your Encamp account, you can also order your RFID tags where you can put them on any of your, barrels of toxic waste, or maybe you're a farmer and you just have fertilizer spread out across, say, 20 locations in 50 fields. If you have all of these tagged, then instead of even having to go and count the barrels and, calculate the weight, it would be as simple as just scanning it with your phone with Bluetooth, and we can just pull in that information and really just make it even faster and more accurate, because you're removing the human element, which really is where a lot of mistakes happen. I'm amazed how many people miscount 9 or 10 things. Like there are 10 things in front of them. They're like, maybe I have 15. You're like, do you really have 15? So just finding ways to essentially make this.
Luke, you don't get it. The cognitive burden to count to 10. It's too much. Nobody can be expected to do that.
It's a tall order, I know. One of our goals is that, as we see it, our customers, so say in the agriculture industry, if you're a farmer, you became a farmer because you want to grow food, you want to feed the world, and you have a commitment to that. You didn't go into farming to essentially be a compliance dude,
to report on how much fertilizer you have and how you're storing it.
Absolutely. It's just the cognitive burden is also just sort of the pain of having to relearn how to do these reports that you need to do for 1 month every, 3 months. And you're just like, what is that? If you think about why TurboTax has been able to be so effective with taxes, it's because it lets a chump like me file my taxes in 45 minutes. And I don't know anything about tax law, but I trust that Intuit has done all the work. And I can just go through those screens. It asks me, like, how am I feeling about doing taxes this year? I'm like, I'm feeling pretty good. And then, shows me the whole process, and I can just be done with it and really, get on with doing what I'm actually interested in doing, which, in my case is building this company. But for our customers, that could be, running your manufacturing facilities, running your fulfillment centers, growing your soybeans or corn or feed or whatever. There's just we see our job as essentially getting people back to doing what they actually want to be doing and letting them have the happy boss face instead of the, frustrated, angry, I need to do 50 compliance reports in the next 2 months or I'm going to get fined $10 million boss face.
Thanks for that.
Oh, yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Full Stack PEO. Most founders start companies because they figured out a better way to solve a problem or serve a need, not because they love tracking payroll, filling out compliance forms, and explaining employee benefits packages. And yet, all that stuff still has to be done. That's why there's Full Stack PEO. Full Stack PEO specializes in turnkey HR for emerging companies, not just those core services, but advice and expertise that help founders maximize employee potential. Curious? Find out more at fullstackpeo.com.
I want to push you a little bit further into the future. So let's go 10, 15 years from now. What are some of the either new technologies that are coming on in the market or trends that you see, so just thinking through connected devices, right? And like the ability to get a today a 3G card and drop it in something, or a 4G card. We have 5G coming online here soon, right? Like, so the ability to just have a device talk to the world, right? Like one would assume, I don't know this necessarily that well, but one would assume 10, 15 years from now, it's going to be even cheaper and easier to do that, right? So you've seen this in fleet management, right? The ability to just put telematics on every piece of equipment you have out in the field. At the point that becomes able to do down to the container and not just the piece of equipment that's moving the container, how do you think that changes the game, or maybe has it already? Like, do you see trends where that's starting to emerge, where you'll be tying into those types of systems versus trying to figure out how to do it yourself? Any kind of macro trends there that you see that you guys can play into?
Yeah, that's a really good question, expansive question. So just generally, I think IoT is going to be increasingly, and it's already really important, but just increasingly important in any industry that is using physical assets, especially if you're wanting to keep track of them. And it's interesting. So one of the most common items that requires environmental reports is actually a forklift, because the lead acid batteries that run forklifts have lead and sulfuric acid, both of which are hazardous. And so you have to report. So not only is it the barrel that you have to report, but it is actually the way you move the barrel often needs to be reported, which is just kind of a little fun fact. One of our biggest customers actually is primarily interested because they have more forklifts than I think anyone in the world, maybe. They're one of the largest logistics companies, and they don't know where they all are, like, ever. To answer your
comforting.
Right? Yeah. Fortunately, it's just a forklift. But I don't know. I'm not even sure that we know where all our nukes are. So we might want to cut that. But
dude, that's staying.
Yeah. Good deal. But yeah, so as I'd say, some emerging trends are the ability to connect both IoT devices, but then something that I'm really interested in seeing how it continues to play out is ways to use sensors to measure volumes of liquids or the specific weight and gravity of chemicals without having to actually take a sample. So I know Beck's Hybrids is working on some of this for, I think they have some sort of, it's loose. I've talked to some of their guys, but I'm not an expert, but I think they're using something like sonar to essentially measure like how much liquid is in their tanks when they're in the fields with fertilizer. And there's a really cool startup actually in Philadelphia called Canary Compliance that all they do is make an Internet of Things device that is installed on underground storage tanks for retail gas stations where they actually fill all the gas.
Yeah.
That can monitor the level of actual fuel in that tank, very, very precisely without having to stick a rod down in it for each one and like do a dipstick kind of thing. And they're doing similar kind of compliance, but for retail gas, making sure that your tanks are not leaking and everything like that. So in the future, I think that those types of technologies are just going to become pervasive, ubiquitous, even just if you can measure all your stuff without a human doing it and it's fairly accurate and you've got a high degree of repeatability in that measuring process, then I think those sources of data will become pretty much the gold standard of actually like how we collect field information, especially for things that are, a known quantity, like a tank. It's not moving. It just sort of hangs out wherever you set it up. But you might want to know at any given moment, how hot is that tank? Is there any leak potential? Is it running low? So yeah, I think IoT is going to be really a big deal in any sort of kind of chemical fleet, logistics, physical asset industries. And I'm just going to keep riffing a little bit. So something that's actually quite close to my interests, because actually before I became a consultant, before any ideas of entrepreneurship, really, I was working as a research associate on a Department of Energy funded project where we were, I was a biogeochemist. This is like what I was doing in undergrad and published some research doing it, did a lot of research. And this DOE project that I was on, essentially my job was to help create a smart forest So Morgan Monroe State Forest in between Indianapolis and Bloomington, they have it's called an Ameriflux tower, which is a giant cell tower essentially in the middle of a forest hooked up with all sorts of meteorological sensors that it's measuring a lot of things. But one of the big questions is how much carbon is coming off of or going into a forest. So what's the mass balance of carbon in a forest? Then my job was essentially to use some proton transfer reaction mass spectrometers, or what they're called, PTRMS, to measure the biologically derived volatile organic compounds, which is also a mouthful, that are being released by microbial populations in soils as they're decomposing leaf litter and root litter and maybe fertilizer inputs if you're in an agricultural system. To figure out it. So, I mean, it's the Department of Energy. And essentially the goal of this project is to say farmland compared to a boreal forest, compared to a deciduous forest, compared to a city, what's actually being emitted into the atmosphere, what's being extracted and stored in a plant, for instance. It's called sequestered. So if a tree takes carbon dioxide out of the air, turns that carbon into woody biomass, its stems or leaves, that carbon is, at least for a couple of years, it's stuck in the tree instead of in the atmosphere. And all of this was extremely interesting because it was basically on the cutting edge of really like, how do you make a smart forest? So I hung out in what we called the hut, which was just basically a double wide trailer in the middle of a forest with a bunch of instruments and then polystyrene tubing running all over the forest, running into it. So it's I guess this is a long-winded way of saying it's near and dear to my heart to think of how do we measure stuff, and how do we measure stuff without having to have people going and measuring everything, because that's how you measure everything. And ideally, in the safest factory, the safest warehouse, the safest community is where you really have a good understanding in real time of what's going on around it and in it without having to have a team of people out there with clipboards and Excel on their iPad or whatever, to track all of this, because it takes so much time that basically no one does it, because who's got a budget just to measure stuff to like maybe figure out something that could be a risk. For better or worse, the way that regulations work is you pretty much only get a regulation in the environmental space when something calamitous has already happened. So like a lot of hazardous material inventory reports that we're working on automating, the reason those exist is because there have been a couple different chemical plants which blew up and killed a bunch of people because they were storing ammonium anhydrous fertilizer, didn't tell anyone about it. They were just storing it in a warehouse. And effectively, this is dynamite. It's the active ingredient, and you can also grow your plants, but it blows up if it lights on fire. So a fire broke out in one of these facilities. A bunch of firefighters and first responders ran in, not aware that there was essentially a bomb in the building. The whole building exploded. Part of the town, it was in Texas, got leveled. And that's when, basically Congress is like, okay, we don't want to have a bunch of dead firefighters. Let's make this a real thing. Our goal is to make it really so easy to maintain your environmental compliance that there's no reason to not do it, and a lot of people don't do it because they don't want to pay the exorbitant consulting fees. And so they try to basically find, how can I do the least amount of work possible, paying the least amount to just, kind of keep my business open, keep the bottom line. And we're very sympathetic to that, especially as a business owner. I've become much more aware of how important it is to, keep your budget controlled. And one of our goals is to make it just cheap and fast and easy and simple to make sure this happens, so that there's really not even an excuse. There's no reason not to, because the potential downsides of noncompliance are really high. And if the barrier to entry to getting in compliance is super low, which is what we're shooting for, then we see a world where we can actually, in my grandest vision, make a world where good for business is actually good for the environment. We'll see how it goes. It's a tall order, but that's sort of that's if I'm trying to recruit someone who's I love it, young environmental scientist, and say, hey, you could go and work for the oil companies, or you can go and build software that the oil companies can use, but also the farmers can use and the small manufacturers can use, and just sort of trying to see where are the trends of technology going and where can we actually sort of push the boundaries a little bit of business as usual to make it just more efficient, make it simple. We think simple is smart at Encamp. That's one of our avoid complexity. Consultants, lawyers, there's industries that bill by the hour. And my dad is a lawyer, so I'm not hating on lawyers. I love lawyers. They keep you from getting sued. But they do have a habit of, trying to make things seem more complex than they actually are so that you're reliant on the lawyers. I think this is very similar to environmental consultants because they don't have any real reason to make it easy for people. Right. They want to make it so hard that you can't think about switching from your consulting firm. And we're coming and peeling back kind of that cloak of obscurity and saying, hey, it's actually just tell us these 20 things and we can get it done for you, So I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask one more kind of theme of questions before we break up. At any time I see software that skirts with government compliance, and we have one of these in our portfolio too, around water, it seems like there's always this, which is a little bit philosophical, always this delicate thing of like, at what point are you potentially helping shape and push regulatory compliance versus just responding to the latest trends in regulatory compliance? And a simple example of that could be as you guys grow and bring on more and more customers and have more and more of a footprint. And let's say you reach a point where with one of those reports, you become the vehicle of you're reporting like 40%. Like 40% of the compliance reports that come through your system. That would be awesome, by the way. That means you've done a really amazing thing. Shooting for it. But now at that point, it almost begs the question, if I'm the government or a state agency or something like that, at what point does it make sense for me to say, you know what? We just need everybody to use this, right? And so now the method of reporting becomes using your system. I'd love your thoughts, and that's a very loaded philosophical question, but I'd love your thoughts on like what you, and you're not there yet, but like, where do you guys come down on that fine line of like, we're here as an enabler versus, we think that someday we may be able to influence policy and the effectiveness of these types of regulations? Yeah, it's a really good question. I think in the most straightforward way, there's a high chance if we succeed that will happen. Because basically the way that these reports are currently done is, even right now, a lot of private companies work with individual state governments to put together even just a really simple reporting portal, which is just how you have to report. And it's not necessarily streamlined. It's not built for consumers, right? But they have government contracts. We see a real distinct possibility, exactly what you're saying. If we get enough market share, then we can start saying, hey, we already have the critical mass to just convert this into the way that everyone should report. Then there's a consistent data standard. We can ensure that we can work with the regulators to say, do you have any additional things that you want to make sure are captured, and make sure that they are captured, essentially. And I think unifying, it is a touchy issue, because like something that I think would really actually help environmental compliance in the US is the ability to make different states' regulations more consistent, because especially bigger companies that are working across different states have a lot greater burden if all these states have their own methods that they've sort of just hacked together, or they're working with a local, dev shop or something who's thrown up some sort of just, I don't want to say bad, but not with the customer in mind type of system. And that just makes without even a deep understanding of the problem they're really trying to solve. Right? Totally. Yeah. I mean, they're essentially just contractors who the government's like, collect this data. And they're like, sure, we can throw something together. They're probably not talking to the people who are actually even using this software, because they don't need to. They're going from the command and control, the top down. But yeah, there's a very good chance that if we succeed, we will be able to push for some of that, and essentially just sort of, it's weird. It's like lobbying on behalf of industry with government can actually be in the benefit of environmental protection if you are lobbying for something that works. So we're not at all like this, but if you think about Tesla, Tesla has a mission of getting the world off of fossil fuels for cars. And they've pushed pretty hard for governments to subsidize supercharging stations and building some of the electrical infrastructure to make it easy for you to use a Tesla. And I think that's just good for the world. It's better for the country if we move towards a system where we can actually have a more sustainable electrical grid. On the compliance side, I think I don't want to compare us to Tesla. We're not Tesla. And we have Yet. Yeah, that's the dream. I do like Elon Musk a lot. He's a fascinating guy and maybe a tortured soul. But I think there is a lot of value in sort of paying attention to some of the boring, regulated, necessary upkeep types of systems that just really, they're important that they're done well. And they're niche enough that people don't really think about them that much. And especially in the technology space, something that me and my co-founders were committed to from the very beginning was building a company and a product that actually helps solve real problems rather than trying to find something that is cool that we can do to then we're not a consumer tech company, right? And nothing against consumer tech companies. We've just been committed from the beginning to not only be B2B, but to try to be B2B in a way that is aligning the values of the different kind of constituencies of, the regulators, the community, the public trust, the, industry that is building all our stuff and shipping all our stuff. Like Amazon can do 2-day delivery. It's amazing. I use Amazon Prime. I also want to make sure that their warehouses are safe for people working in them. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, frankly, to make big improvements on that. Because I would say, in general, the environmental space and in some ways, as Peter Thiel would say, just the industry of atoms, like dealing with physical stuff, it's lagging way behind on kind of technological adoption compared to internet companies. Right. Google can get 1 trillion data points a day or whatever, probably more, and they just can feed all that stuff in, but then figuring out how to, tie that into something that really exists. This is actually something of kind of 2 points, but I read an interesting article about how challenging it will be to actually solve environmental issues because we are so used to thinking about the pace of technological change in terms of software, where you've got Moore's law and you actually have an exponential function. You can just add, more and more chips and just increase the efficiency of computing. But with something, say, like switching from coal, there are billions of dollars of physical infrastructure that is just built, and it is hard to change all of that in a month or even a decade, because it really is just, it exists. This giant plant won't just go away, and you can't have a software update that pushes for it. So we're trying to, in a long vision, I see us being on the side of trying to be pragmatic to figure out ways to make adoption to better and more sustainable systems easier. And then this is actually just completely random, but it's something that I think is pretty salient for thinking about, like, if you're an entrepreneur, there's a story that I thought was very inspiring where when we as a country built an electrical grid, all sorts of factories essentially started to hook up all of their machines with electrical wiring instead of steam power. And they're like, cool, this is like this new electricity thing. It should be really awesome. It'll increase our efficiencies. And it actually took about 30 years for the output of any factories to actually get more efficient. And the reason that this 30-year lag happened is that people didn't change the position of any of the machines in the factory when you wired it with electricity. They just switched the power source. And then it took some people kind of thinking outside the box to be like, oh, wait, if we don't have to rely on these steam lines, we can actually make it so that a worker can be more efficient. We can put stuff maybe closer together. I think we're doing something similar, analogous in software in this industry, because we are not building any new tech. It doesn't, we're, obviously like writing code, but we're not building some algorithm that has a machine learning protocol that can do something no one else has ever done. We're essentially just taking, the old way of doing it with spreadsheets and a person looking at it and copy pasting it and saying, with the internet, we can actually rearrange the machines. Like as a consumer, why do you need to send emails to your consultant who then reads your emails and puts together a spreadsheet by hand, emails you the spreadsheet? You have to figure out the spreadsheet, put in all your data from another spreadsheet and email it back. And just this whole, it's just an older way of thinking about how can data actually be communicated between different people? And we're like, why don't we just rearrange it so that when you log on, you're just like, I want to do tier 2. Here's my facility. I've pulled in all of the information from my facility from these databases that exist and have open APIs. Now I have a series of questions that tell me what I actually need to update. Now I'm done. And you just hit the button and we get it to the right people on time and right. And, the whole pitch. But yeah, so I don't know if you're speaking to the aspiring entrepreneurs out there, I would say if you can find a problem that is big and also that can be solved by rearranging existing tools to just think about a process differently. You don't need to think about how to build new technology because the world we have so much amazing technology that's not actually being applied to so many different industries. There are hundreds of billions of dollars of potential market just out there that are underserved by what you can do with your smartphone. You can download a game and do some crazy stuff to play a fun game. But, if you're a farmer, you don't necessarily have those tools for your industry and for your professional needs. And I just think it's an inspiring thought to just really think how can you tweak existing stuff and put it in an ordered system that actually makes it easier for people to do what they want to do and to succeed, basically.
All right. If folks want to get in touch with you, or if they want to learn more about what you're doing with the company, how can people find you?
So feel free to email me at any time at luke@encampHQ.com. You can also check out our website, which is encampHQ.com. We're on Twitter at EncampHQ, Facebook, pretty much everything's EncampHQ. And then also we're in the Novel Co-working Tower on Circle Center in downtown Indianapolis, which is a beautiful space. And we're pretty much always down to chat. So if you're interested in talking, just feel free to shoot me an email or, just stop by sometime and we'll say, hey.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you as well. It was a pleasure to come on. And I have to say the plug for Developer Town, you're doing a lot of cool stuff here. I must say 2 years ago, I lived on 52nd Street and I looked over at Developer Town. I was like, I wonder what they're doing here. And now, I wouldn't have thought 2 years later I would be hanging out doing a podcast with you. So thanks for inviting me on.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
If you're thinking of launching a SaaS product, Startup Competitors can provide data on your closest competitors, survey potential users, or provide other product validation services. Learn more at startupcompetitors.com.